The bride asked me to sit by the bathroom wall so I wouldn't ruin her wedding photos. What she didn't know was that inside my purse was a secret worth millions. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. People think breaking points are loud, yelling, crying, throwing plates across the room. But for me, it was quiet, just a simple request, delivered with a flawless smile that told me exactly what my son's fiancé thought of me. Too old, too plain, too inconvenient to be captured in her perfect little scrapbook of Instagram memories. My name is Evelyn Parker, and I am 62 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, a city where the houses are painted brighter than the futures most of us ever get to live. I've been a widow for 14 years. My husband, Henry, passed away from a heart attack while fixing the gutters one spring afternoon. I remember that day more vividly than I remember my own wedding. After he was gone, it was just me and my boy, Mark. Raising him wasn't easy. Charleston is beautiful, but beauty doesn't pay bills. I cleaned offices after hours, scrubbed bathrooms in hotels tourists would later call charming, and picked up double shifts whenever I could. I sold Henry's old tools to cover tuition, and when Mark's car broke down during college, I pawned my engagement ring without telling him. Every wrinkle on my face could be traced back to a bill paid late, or a meal skipped, so that my son had what he needed. Now, Mark is 34, a grown man with a career and a polished confidence that reminds me too much of the father he barely remembers. And in just a few weeks, he was set to marry Samantha Hayes. Samantha with the perfect teeth, the glossy hair, the laugh that carried across any room. People called her ambitious. I called her something else, calculated. There was always a chill beneath her charm, like every hug and every compliment had an expiration date. Still, I told myself, love makes people better. Maybe she would bring out the best in my son. Maybe she would soften around the edges once life stopped being a performance. That's what I told myself when I spent nights stitching the hem of a secondhand dress so I'd look presentable at their rehearsal dinner. That's what I believed when I took extra shifts cleaning offices that smelled like bleach and loneliness just to set aside a little more for their wedding. I didn't complain. Not when Samantha's family reserved half the ballroom for their friends. Not when Mark forgot to return my calls because he was busy with cake tastings and photo shoots. Mothers don't complain. We endure. We smile when we're asked to. We step aside when told to. And we keep showing up even when no one notices. But as I stood in that banquet hall, Samantha leaning close with her perfume sharp in my nose, whispering about bathroom walls and ruined photographs, something inside me finally broke. Not the fragile kind of break that leaves you weeping, but the clean snap of a rope pulled too tight for too long. She didn't know that tucked inside my worn purse, next to a packet of tissues and a bottle of aspirin, was a secret bigger than the flowers she paraded across the tables or the champagne tower built just for show. She didn't know that I had been holding back a storm that could change her life, and my own, forever. Because while Samantha was busy arranging her picture-perfect world, I had been arranging something else, something she and even my son couldn't imagine. And it all started with a choice I made long before her sleek smile ever entered our lives. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten mother. People often assume that mothers are born strong, that we arrive in this world ready to sacrifice, ready to put someone else's dreams ahead of our own. But that's not true. Strength isn't something you inherit. It's something life forces into you, day after day, bill after bill, sacrifice after sacrifice. After Henry died, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had a 9-year-old boy staring at me across the dinner table, asking if we'd be okay, and I swore we would. From that moment on, every choice I made was for Mark. I took the graveyard shifts no one wanted. I cleaned until my knees ached and my back screamed. I scrubbed toilets in hotels where people twice my age vacationed, while I counted quarters to buy groceries. When Mark's first semester of college came, the tuition bill looked like a mountain I could never climb. So I did what mothers do. I found a way. I sold Henry's gold watch, the one he got for 20 years at the shipyard. I pawned the engagement ring he slipped onto my finger when we were both young and foolish enough to believe love was all we'd ever need. I told Mark it was a temporary loan, that I'd get it back one day. But the truth is, once something leaves your hands in desperation, it rarely returns. Mark never asked how the bills got paid. Not really. He assumed scholarships covered more than they did, or that part-time jobs stretched further than they could. And I let him believe that. Because what kind of mother tells her son she's starving herself to keep him fed? What kind of mother admits she's been sleeping 4 hours a night so he can graduate without debt hanging over his head? The years rolled on, and the sacrifices changed shape. When his old sedan broke down, I signed over the title to Henry's pickup and rode the bus. When credit card companies circled him like vultures, I cut checks I couldn't afford. I told myself it was temporary, that once he found his footing, he'd turn around and notice all the ways I'd kept the ground from collapsing beneath him. But he didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. Because noticing would mean acknowledging. And acknowledging would mean feeling some sense of obligation. Mark grew into a man who believed stability was his own doing, as if fortune favored him simply because he was smart enough, capable enough, driven enough. And Samantha encouraged that belief. She loved to boast about Mark's independence, about how he'd built his life with no safety nets. She said it at dinner parties, smiling at me like she was delivering a compliment, when all I felt was the sting of erasure. She knew better. She had seen me write the checks, had walked in once when I was transferring money to cover his debt. She knew every safety net was woven by my hands, but to her friends, to her family, she painted him as a self-made man. And me, I was just the quiet figure in the background, the woman who raised him, but apparently contributed nothing to the story she wanted the world to hear. That was the moment the mask slipped from me. Not at the wedding, not when she whispered about the bathroom wall. It was earlier, when I realized Samantha wasn't just ignoring me. She was rewriting history, and I was being erased from my own son's life. 15 years ago, when I was still young enough to believe in hope, but old enough to understand disappointment, an old friend from church came to me with an idea. He and a few partners were starting a small technology company. They needed investors. Nothing big, just people willing to take a chance. I didn't have much, but at the time, I had a small life insurance payout from Henry's passing, and after paying off the funeral and a few debts, there was a little left. $10,000. It was more money than I'd ever held at once, and I should have tucked it safely away for Mark's education or emergencies. Instead, I let myself believe my friend when he promised it could grow. I signed the papers, handed over the check, and told myself I was being smart. Within a few years, when the company hit trouble, I assumed that money was gone. I never even told Mark about it. Why burden him with another reminder that his mother made foolish choices? I filed it away in the drawer of regrets and went back to working nights. Then, this spring, a letter arrived. thick envelope, official seal, too formal to be junk mail. Inside was a statement from that very same company. They had gone public. Against every odd I had imagined, they were not only still alive, but thriving. And because I had never withdrawn my tiny stake, it had matured into something unfathomable. My portion was now worth over $42 million. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, staring until the words blurred. 42 million. It might as well have said 42 billion. The number was too large to feel real. My entire life had been measured in overdue bills and grocery receipts. How could I even begin to understand what that kind of money meant? At first, my instinct was simple. Share it. My son was getting married. What better gift than to give him and Samantha the stability I had spent decades trying to build? I pictured handing them the deed to a home where they could start their life together without worry, maybe even adding a check that would clear away any lingering debts. The idea filled me with a strange joy, like finally I could be more than the mother who scraped by. I could be the mother who saved the day. But as the weeks passed and wedding plans unfolded, that joy began to sour. I heard Samantha bragging again about Mark's independence. I caught the look she gave me when I arrived in my modest dress at a family dinner, and I remembered the checks, the loans, the ring I had pawned. For the first time, I wondered if giving them everything would mean losing the last piece of myself. Would they even say thank you? Would they see me? Or would the house and the money just become another line in Samantha's carefully curated story? That was the first moment I hesitated. For the first time in 34 years, I thought, maybe they don't deserve it. When the papers were finally signed, I walked out of the real estate office, clutching a folder that didn't feel real. A villa on the Ashley River, one of those historic Charleston homes with white columns, wraparound porches, and oak trees that bent toward the water, like they were bowing to the tide. $3.1 million, paid in cash. I should have been trembling with fear at what I'd just done, but instead, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in decades. That house wasn't for me, not yet. It was for them, for my son and his bride, for the family I thought I still had a chance of belonging to. I spent hours walking through furniture stores, pretending I was just another grandmother looking for gifts, while in reality, I was arranging the details of a life-changing present. In addition to the deed, I had the bank prepare a cashier's check for $2.5 million. Enough to wipe out debts, enough to buy cars, enough to prove, once and for all, that I wasn't the burden Samantha liked to imply. Both the deed and the check were tucked into a polished mahogany box lined with velvet. I tied a satin ribbon across it, white with a gold edge, so it looked like the kind of gift you'd see in a magazine spread about perfect weddings. Every time I glanced at that box on my kitchen counter, I imagined their faces, Mark's shock, Samantha's tears, the way the room might go quiet when they realized what was inside. For 2 weeks, that fantasy sustained me. Whenever exhaustion from long shifts threatened to drag me under, I thought of the moment they'd open that box. I told myself that no matter how small Samantha made me feel, once she saw what I was capable of giving, she'd have no choice but to respect me. Gratitude would fix the cracks between us. But then came the phone call. It was late evening, a week before the wedding. I had stopped by their townhouse to drop off some floral samples that Samantha insisted on. The front door was ajar, and I heard her voice before I stepped inside. She was in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like a caged animal. "No, I can't let him find out. Not until after the wedding. Just cover it for now. I'll have the money soon. Don't ask how. Just trust me." Her tone was sharp, desperate, nothing like the smooth socialite she performed for everyone else. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding. The words, "cover it for now," echoed in my head. A debt? Gambling? Another man? I didn't know, but the certainty in her voice chilled me. When she ended the call and spotted me, her smile reappeared instantly, all polished charm. "Evelyn, you startled me. I was just finalizing some vendor details. You know how stressful weddings can be." I nodded, pretending not to notice the sheen of sweat on her forehead, or the way her fingers trembled as she set down the phone. But inside, something shifted again. That box on my kitchen counter, with its deed and its check, suddenly felt heavier, not like a gift, but like a weapon waiting to be misused. I could still picture their joy, still imagine Mark's gratitude. But now there was another vision, darker and sharper. Samantha cashing the check to erase secrets she never planned to share. And for the first time, I wondered if giving them everything would mean losing, not just my sacrifice, but my dignity. The resort glittered like something out of a glossy magazine spread. White tents arched over manicured lawns. Crystal chandeliers dangled from beams, brought in just for the event, and a string quartet played on the terrace as if this were a royal celebration instead of two ordinary people promising forever. I had saved for months to buy my dress, a simple navy gown with delicate beading that shimmered softly under the light. It wasn't couture, it wasn't designer, but it was the nicest thing I'd worn since Henry's funeral. For once, I felt almost beautiful. I pinned my hair up, slipped on modest pearl earrings, and prayed it would be enough. When I arrived, I took in the sight of Samantha in her gown, lace hugging her like a glove, diamonds flashing at her throat, photographers clicking from every angle. She looked radiant, of course. She always did. And my son, Mark, stood tall beside her, beaming in a tailored suit I knew cost more than I made in 6 months. He looked proud, confident, like he belonged in this world of champagne fountains and curated perfection. I found my assigned seat near the back, tucked among distant relatives and business associates I'd never met. The food was exquisite, the wine flowing. Still, I kept glancing at the polished mahogany box on the gift table. It sat there like a promise, waiting for its moment. The ceremony ended, and the reception turned lively. Guests mingled, laughter floated across the room, and cameras flashed nonstop. That's when Samantha approached. She bent close, her perfume overwhelming, her smile camera-ready. "Evelyn," she whispered, voice sugary sweet. "Could you do me a tiny favor?" "Of course," I said automatically. That's what mothers do. Her lips curved higher. "Would you mind sitting near the restroom? Our Instagram theme is young and chic, and I just don't want the photos to feel mismatched. You understand, right?" The words landed like a slap. Young and chic, mismatched. She was asking me to step aside from my own son's wedding album, because at 62, I no longer fit the picture. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. Behind her, Mark stood a few feet away, fiddling with his cufflinks. For a moment, his eyes flicked toward me, as if he sensed something was wrong. I waited for him to step forward, to defend me, to say I belonged in those photos because I had earned my place. But he didn't. Samantha touched his arm, whispered something, and he let her lead him back toward the dance floor without a word. The noise of the reception blurred. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, all of it faded as a sharp clarity took hold. 34 years of sacrifice, of working until my body ached, of giving everything I had, reduced to a woman too old to be seen. I rose from my chair, smoothed my dress, and walked steadily toward the gift table. Guests barely noticed as I slipped between them. My fingers closed around the mahogany box, heavy with its secret. For a moment, I imagined their shock when they discovered it missing. For a moment, I almost laughed. Without hesitation, I tucked the box under my arm and headed for the exit, past the waiters balancing trays of champagne, past the photographer angling for the perfect shot, past my son, who didn't even glance in my direction as I walked out of his wedding. Outside, the evening air was cool against my flushed skin. The valet hurried toward me, asking if I needed a car. I shook my head. My legs carried me forward with more strength than I thought I had left. Behind me, music swelled. Applause broke out for the couple's first dance. But I was done dancing to their tune. With every step away from that glittering facade, I felt lighter, stronger. The box was safe in my hands again, and for the first time in years, so was my dignity. The morning after the wedding, I woke in my small apartment, with the mahogany box still sitting on the kitchen table. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of the peeling paint on the walls or the secondhand furniture. That little box was heavier than all of it. It held proof that I was no longer powerless. Within a week, I put down an offer on a penthouse in downtown Charleston. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, the kind of view I used to pause and admire from the sidewalk when I was bone-tired from work. Now it was mine. Mine. The move was quick. Movers hauled in new furniture, the kind I used to run my fingers across in showrooms but never dared to price. A leather sofa, a mahogany dining table, rugs thick enough to sink your toes into. I hired a housekeeper who came twice a week, and for the first time, I woke up without a knot of dread in my stomach about overdue bills. I drank coffee on my balcony and let the salt air wash over me like a baptism. But peace never lasts long when people believe you owe them something. Mark and Samantha visited 2 weeks after the wedding. I could see the calculation in Samantha's eyes as she scanned the apartment. She noticed the art on the walls, the fresh flowers, the gleam of the new kitchen appliances. Mark tried to keep his tone casual when he asked how I'd managed to upgrade. I smiled, offered them tea, and told them only that I'd decided it was time to take better care of myself. That wasn't enough for Samantha. A few days later, I spotted a man lingering near the building entrance, pretending to check his phone. A week after that, the concierge mentioned a private investigator asking questions about me. It didn't take much to guess who had hired him. Their investigator must have thought I was still the gullible woman who pawned her ring for tuition bills. He discovered my new home, my new car, even the renovations on the river villa. What he didn't find, because I hadn't told a soul, was the windfall from that forgotten investment. Still, I wasn't naive. If they were digging, then I needed to dig deeper. So I hired my own investigator, a woman named Claire, with sharp eyes and no patience for liars. It didn't take her long. Samantha, it turned out, had debts. Not the kind you could cover with a credit card. Gambling debts. She'd been frequenting a private poker circle in Mount Pleasant, running up losses in the hundreds of thousands. The calls I overheard weeks earlier suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been stressed about wedding vendors. She'd been desperate to keep creditors at bay. Claire slid the file across my coffee table. Receipts, text transcripts, photographs of Samantha leaving the back entrance of a gaming club. "She's been bleeding money for 2 years," Claire said. "The only thing keeping her afloat is the hope of a bailout." I sat back in my leather chair, the irony sharp as a knife. My daughter-in-law didn't just want me erased from the wedding photos. She wanted my bank account to erase her mistakes. I looked at the mahogany box again, tucked safely in my closet. Inside was a house, and a check that could wipe Samantha's slate clean. But after what I knew now, handing it over would be the same as setting fire to everything I had worked for. The woman they thought was a burden had become their lifeline, and I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to save them. They showed up on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced. I heard the knock before I saw their reflection in the glass of my balcony doors. Mark shifting uneasily, Samantha perfectly poised, with a casserole dish in her hands, as though this were just another family visit. I opened the door, and Samantha leaned in with a hug that smelled of perfume and calculation. "Evelyn," she said, her voice syrupy, "we've been meaning to come sooner. We just needed some time." Mark's smile was tight, forced. "Mom, can we sit down? We owe you an apology." I gestured toward the sofa. They settled in, eyes sweeping the penthouse again, measuring every detail: the polished floors, the harbor view, the expensive furniture that screamed of a woman they didn't know how to categorize anymore. Samantha set the casserole on the table as if food could erase humiliation. "About the wedding," she began, lowering her eyes just enough to seem humble. "I was stressed. I said things I shouldn't have. I hope you can forgive me." Mark chimed in quickly. "She's right, Mom. It was a mistake. We really want a fresh start. With you. Your family." I let their words hang in the air. Their faces told a story. Their mouths didn't. Samantha's desperate brightness. Mark's nervous flicker every time he glanced at me. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here because they had questions. I folded my hands in my lap. "Do you know what was in that box I carried out of your wedding?" Samantha blinked. Mark frowned. "The one you took off the gift table?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "Inside was the deed to a riverfront villa and a cashier's check for $2.5 million. That was meant to be your wedding gift." The silence that followed was suffocating. Samantha's smile faltered. Mark's jaw tightened. I watched the realization dawn in their eyes. The fortune they had lost in a single moment of cruelty. Samantha recovered first. "That's unbelievable. Evelyn, you don't have to—" I cut her off. "But you'll never see it, because gifts are for people who respect you, not for those who shove you to the shadows of their perfect photographs." Mark's face drained of color. "Mom, please, we didn't mean—" Samantha's mask cracked, irritation flaring. "You can't honestly expect us to believe you'd give away that kind of money." That's when I slid a folder across the table. "Claire's file. Then maybe you'll believe this. Your poker nights, Samantha. The debts you've been hiding. Hundreds of thousands owed to people who don't take IOUs." Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Mark turned to her sharply. "What is she talking about?" Samantha stammered. It's not what it looks like. I leaned forward. "It looks like you were counting on my money to clean up your mess. And when you told me to stand by the restroom, you didn't just insult me. You revealed exactly how little you value me." Mark looked between us, betrayed. Samantha reached for his hand, but he pulled it back. I stood, letting my words settle like stones in the quiet. "I want you both to understand something. I'm revising my will. If you ever want a relationship with me, it will not be based on what I can give you financially. It will be based on respect, on love, on something real." The plot twist was deliberate. I could see the panic flicker in Samantha's eyes. They had come expecting to coax me back into their pocketbook. Instead, they left with the knowledge that the bank was closed and the terms had changed forever. As they walked out, casserole untouched on the table, I felt no guilt. For once, the power was mine. In the weeks after that confrontation, something inside me shifted Permanently, for years, I had lived as if survival was my only option, always stretching dollars, always trying to prove my worth to people who rarely looked up from their own reflections. Now, with a fortune at my fingertips and a second chance at life, I realized survival wasn't enough. I wanted purpose. I began by meeting with lawyers and financial planners, not to secure my own comfort. I already had that. But to ask a question that startled them. How do I protect women like me? They stared at me, puzzled, until I explained. Too many widows, too many mothers, too many grandmothers had been reduced to walking wallets for their families. They were pressured, manipulated, shamed into handing over what little they had, while their sacrifices were dismissed as if they were nothing. That was when the Evelyn Parker Foundation was born. Its mission was simple: to fight financial abuse inside families, to educate older women about their rights, and to give them legal and emotional support when their children or in-laws treated them as piggy banks instead of human beings. I used $5 million of my new fortune to establish it. The day we opened our small Charleston office, I stood outside watching women walk in, hesitant at first, then hopeful. I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Word spread quickly. Local newspapers covered the story of the widow who turned lottery fortune into justice, though they never knew the whole truth about how much had been almost given away. At night, I sat in my penthouse or on the porch of the river villa, reading letters from women across the country. Letters from mothers who had been tricked into co-signing loans, grandmothers who had lost homes paying off their children's debts, widows who lived in silence because they feared being abandoned if they spoke up. Their words cut me deeply, but they also fueled me. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. And yes, I still lived. I traveled. Paris, Rome, even the Greek islands Henry once dreamed of seeing. I bought novels I had never had time for and spent whole afternoons reading in sunlit libraries. I donated to causes that mattered to me. For the first time, my days weren't defined by exhaustion or sacrifice. They were mine, but the past never fully lets go. Mark called occasionally. His voice was softer now, tinged with regret. He would ask about my health, about the foundation, about whether I was happy. I knew what he was really asking. If I could forgive him for standing silent on the most important day of my life. And though I told him I loved him, though I said he'd always be my son, the truth was harsher. He had made his choice that day, and choices have consequences. Samantha, on the other hand, rarely spoke to me directly. When she did, her words dripped with forced sweetness, the same artificial concern she'd wielded at the wedding. But beneath it I could hear the bitterness. She had gambled not just her money, but her future, on the assumption that I would always be there to bail her out. Losing my trust meant losing her safety net, and that loss aged her faster than any debt collector could. Sometimes, when I walked the harbor promenade at dusk, I imagined what might have been. I pictured Mark and Samantha standing in their riverfront villa, laughing, grateful, maybe even humbled by the gift. In that vision, we were a family again. But then I remembered the way Samantha leaned toward me, whispering about bathrooms and photographs. I remembered Mark's silence, and the vision dissolved, because that's the truth no one tells you. One moment can undo decades. One sentence, one look, one choice, and the course of a relationship is changed forever. People ask me if I regret it. If I regret not handing them that box, not buying their affection with deeds and checks. My answer is always the same. I don't regret a thing, because giving them everything would have meant losing myself. And after 62 years, I finally understood I was worth saving. Today, the foundation continues to grow. We've helped women reclaim bank accounts, stop predatory relatives, and even press charges against those who stole from them. Every victory feels like a piece of justice, not just for them, but for me, for the Evelyn who once pawned her ring in silence, for the Evelyn who once sat in the back row, too ashamed to admit she was broke, for the Evelyn who finally walked away from a wedding that was supposed to be her proudest day. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's freedom. And so, I'll leave you with this question. What would you have done if you were me?